morning, everybody. Thanks for navigating the obstacle course to get here today. So, anyway, I'm going to make this really brief. I had a few dozen different introductions, but basically, I've been pretty much an activist for humanitarian and environmental causes for quite a while. And I never knew what political party anybody was. I just worked with people. The last couple of years, though, something really crazy happened, and all of a sudden, all this partisanship came into the mix. So I was reading a paper in Falls Church, Virginia, and I saw an op-ed about this organization called Better Angels. I reached out to them, and Mel reached back to me. He's the coordinator for Better Angels, and we tried to do a workshop. But I needed to find 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. It was tough for me to find Republicans, so I failed. So we're going to do something a little different, and whatever we do, we're all going to learn from it. So with no further ado, my Jewish, Buddhist, contrarian friend, Mel Pine, and take it from here, Mel. You're welcome.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Chris and Bruce. I got chills in the final verse of that song, and I'll explain a little later why that verse gives me chills. But first, I had been an itinerant Buddhist for more than 3 decades, and by itinerant Buddhist, I mean not that I was a mendicant going, from door to door looking for handouts or anything, but I hadn't found my Buddhist home, a core teacher, a school of Buddhism that I knew to be my home. And that changed the first week in January 2016. I went to a retreat in Putnam County, New York, at the Garrison Institute, which sits on the banks of the Hudson River, looking across the river at West Point. And it's an old monastery that's now a retreat center. And I went for a retreat led by Lama Surya Das, and decided before midway through the retreat that I had found my home, my root teacher, and my school of Buddhism is called Dzogchen as taught by him, and I'll get back to Dzogchen later, but I want to describe something that happened the first morning. You get there in the afternoon, you have a meal, you enter the noble silence. And I'd been to a lot of silent retreats, but every one is different, every community is different. I'm a little nervous getting used to it. And at breakfast the first morning, all of a sudden, this bizarrely dressed woman came in the back door making strange guttural sounds, grabbed some food, wrapped it in her clothing, and left again. Now, this was a really cold January morning, right on the Hudson River. So I was thinking, well, is this some homeless person, a local crazy who was coming in foraging for food, and did I need to alert somebody? Nobody else there seemed to be bothered by it, but I wondered if people noticed. She was disturbing the noble silence. Everybody else was eating. Nobody paid attention. And so a little while later, we retreatants gathered for the Lama Surya's morning Dharma talk. And there she was, one of us, one of the retreatants. She made a few sounds during the formal part of the morning when we're not supposed to speak, but no one seemed bothered. And then later at lunch, though, she was more vocal again and behaving bizarrely again. And it was driving me nuts. Now, in his books and public appearances, Lama Surya had introduced a concept he calls co-meditating. This is mentally inviting someone else, present or not, living or dead, into your meditation space. It could be someone you admire, or someone you're having difficulty with, and you want to overcome the difficulty. So there at lunch, I went, well, okay, let me try co-meditating. And I just sat at the table, and I closed my eyes, and I connected with this woman. I became the person who needs to make noises, who needs to act out, maybe beset by some kind of compulsion. And when I opened my eyes, I was no longer offended by her behavior. But the funny thing is, or interesting thing is, as the week went on, I noticed her drawing closer to me. And on the final day of the workshop, she insisted on sitting next to me in the closing circle, and then insisted on carrying my bags out for me. And that's exactly what co-meditation is designed to do, to bring two beings closer. We don't meditate in our Better Angels workshops, but the result is similar. We draw closer to each other, red and blue. And now, I didn't realize quite how much meditation you guys do, but I have a short meditation. If you're meditated out, you can consider it a thought experiment. But I want to do a co-meditation, if you're comfortable doing it, with a historic figure. I'd like you to relax. Take a relaxed position that allows your breath to flow easily. Your hands can rest wherever they're comfortable. And without each out breath, you're relaxing. And when you feel you've released your tensions and you're relaxed, see if you can relax a little bit more. And when you're totally relaxed and calm, I'd like you to be in another time of deep polarization in the United States. And you're co-meditating with President-elect Abraham Lincoln. It's late February 1861, and he's got his first inaugural address to write. He doesn't know yet if the southern states will follow through on their stated intent to secede from the Union. He wants to reach out in a final attempt to prevent a bloody civil war. He's looking for the right words. And these words arise from deep within him. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Touched by the better angels of our nature. Please open your eyes when you're ready and return to the room. When Lincoln spoke those words, March 4th, 1861, he had no way of knowing what was going to happen next. Less than 6 weeks later, Civil War broke out. He was making one last appeal for Americans to renew their bonds of friendship and avoid bloodshed. The organization I represent, Better Angels, took its name from that quotation. None of us knows whether our current level of polarization and political tribalism will lead to more and more violence, and maybe even some version of a civil war, or whether the pendulum will just swing back in the other direction. But I'm not willing to leave it up to chance. I'm devoting nearly all of my waking hours now to the work of Better Angels, a citizens' movement to depolarize America. It's a decision I made as I looked deeply and spiritually into my life, and that was over the last 3.5 years or so that I kind of re-looked at myself. I had been sliding into apathy, accepting that I had not much left to contribute to the world and not much left to achieve. I hadn't won a Nobel Prize or even batted .250 in the major leagues. But a trauma in my life, the death of my 29-year-old son in an accident in Charlottesville, led me to reevaluate. I focused on the words of the Jackson Browne song you just heard, For a Dancer. Browne wrote it as he grappled with the death of a young friend. And I think the closing verse was directed to himself and all of us. Into a dancer you have grown, from a seed somebody else has thrown. Go on ahead and throw some seeds of your own, and somewhere between the time you arrive and the time you go may lie the reason you were born, but you'll never know. I had more seeds to throw, and my son Thomas did not. I wanted to make up, at least in part, for his lost years. That's how I wanted to spend the rest of my productive years. I eventually decided that I wanted to throw seeds that unite people, that help them make contact with the Buddha, or the inner light, or the God within themselves and each other. As I said, my long Buddhist wanderings led me in January 2016 to Lama Surya Das and his teachings in the Dzogchen tradition. That's a word with a couple of silent letters, so I'll spell it for you. D-Z-O-G-C-H-E-N. Dzogchen, of course. It means, it's Tibetan for the great perfection or the great completion. And here's my own very unofficial explanation of that. We all beings, have within us a perfect Buddha. You might compare it to a flawless mirror, which reflects the world exactly as it is in its primordial, non-dual state. That mirror has been smudged over the eons. It has been smudged by the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the passions, the fears, the angers of our forebears. It has been smudged by our biology and our psychology, which includes tribalism, of course, and it has been smudged by our own actions during our lifetime. All those smudges are my definition of karma. So if every being has this great perfection within, how do we reach it? Well, we begin our path to the inner perfection by reading that the outer world is perfect right now too, flaws and all. The world is perfect in its imperfection. It could be none other than what it is, the result of our collective karma, or what the Buddha called causes and effects. I know that's hard to accept, but remember that Buddhism sees the world as a succession of moments. These words are from the Buddha in one of his sutras. You shouldn't chase after the past or place expectations on the future. What is past is left behind. The future is as yet unreached. Whatever quality is present you clearly see right there, right there. Consider that each moment is perfect as it is. We won't find our Buddha nature, our inner light, or our grace if we're busy fighting what is. We can't change the causes and effects that led us and all beings, including politicians, to this moment. All we can change is the way we act in this very moment. We can't change the past or even be sure about our impact on the future. But in this moment, right now, we have some degree of free will that may clean some of the smudges off our inner mirror. And since we're all interconnected, we're also clearing the inner mirrors of other beings. We can act with what the Buddhists call metta, or loving kindness. Lama Surya often begins his talks with this phrase, and I say it to you now. I bow to the Buddha in your seat. Don't overlook her. Powerful words. And of course, you may see the Buddha inside as an inner light or as any manifestation of what's holy within each of us, or simply in a more secular way, our inherent worth and dignity. The point is to lighten up and accept it, or her, or him. It is our essence. Let go and let be. Accept that you need nothing more to be perfect and at peace. I know that some of you are recoiling. And by the way, this part, I mean, what I say about better angels is, I'm speaking for the organization. Well, the spiritual side, I'm talking for me. You don't need to be a Dzogchen Buddhist to be a better angel. But I know that some of you are recoiling. How can I let go and let be when I'm so flawed? And the other side, however you define that, is dragging this nation and maybe the world into fascism or jingoism or socialism or whatever name you want to give to your worst fear. I'd phrase the question another way. How can you be an effective agent for a better world if you're lost in your fear, anger, and maybe a touch of self-contempt? Self-contempt because you believe you're not perfect. The Buddha talked a lot about attachment and aversion. Translations get tricky, so let's be clear. There's nothing wrong with loving your friends and family and disliking anything you see as dangerous. But when we become so attached to those feelings that they define us, we're in trouble. A Buddhist friend of mine once said, there's nothing wrong with wanting a Maserati. The problem is thinking that a Maserati will bring you happiness. And I'd add, in our current polarized world, there's nothing wrong with opposing the other side. The problem is when it turns into a hate that consumes you. Can we make the world a better place when we fail to see the Buddha, or the inner light, or God, within ourselves and each other? That's where a lot of the nation is right now. Buddhism personifies the hindrances to leading an awakened, enlightened life in the demon Mara. Another way to think of Mara is as representing those human tendencies that lead us away from our inner Buddha, away from enlightenment. In our modern world, fierce tribalism is one of those hindrances. When we were hunter-gatherers living in small family-based units, tribalism helped us survive. We needed to make quick decisions about others, friend or foe. There was no room for confusion. Today, however, the older parts of our brain still make those quick decisions in a world where we may encounter more others in a single day than our primitive ancestors did in a lifetime. So tribalism has become another of Mara's tools. It distracts us from the godliness and dignity in ourselves and others. We all crave a sense of belonging, But how do we see those who aren't included in our tribe or our bubble? Senator Ben Sass has a new book out called "Them: Why We Hate Each Other and What to Do About It," or something like that. And he talks a lot about anti-tribalism. We're so angry at the other side that gives us a tribe to belong to. But coming back to Jackson Browne's lyrics, what seeds are we tossing when we label those on the other side as enemies and refuse to listen mindfully to what they're contributing to the political dialogue? It's hard to listen when we're busy formulating our next argument. Mara likes seeing us that way. And that's where Better Angels comes in. Our organization had its start on the day after the 2016 election. David Blankenhorn in New York City called his friend David Lapp in South Lebanon, Ohio, and mentioned how depressed everybody was, as though there'd been a death in the family. So David Lapp said, "Gee, that's funny, everybody here is partying on the street." So they got the idea of bringing Reds and Blues together to understand each other and maybe find some common ground. Blankenhorn is a great thinker, Lapp is a great organizer, but they needed someone to shape exercises for the Reds and Blues. They needed a social scientist. And so they called their friend Bill Doherty, professor and director of Marriage and Family Therapy program at the University of Minnesota. From that threesome came the first Better Angels Red-Blue workshop, which lasted a weekend in Ohio. Strong Red-Blue friendships grew out of that workshop, as did the Better Angels organization. The good news for participants and moderators is that the workshops no longer last a whole weekend. Now today, as George explained, we'll try to gather around 1 and get started around 1:30, but I'm going to improvise a shorter program than the 7-hour Red-Blue workshop. The 7-hour Red-Blue workshop isn't really 7 hours of dialogue. It's there are a lot of breaks, there's food, and there are exercises with each side separately before people get together. But anyway, equal numbers of Reds and Blues, ideally 5 to 7 of each. Start around a table with 2 moderators and a dozen or so observers. They move to breakout groups and back several times, and in the end, it's unlikely that anyone will have changed their minds, their political stance. But invariably, I've witnessed big changes in how participants view the other side and what participants have to say about listening to the other side. Another program we offer is the 2.5-hour Better Angels Skills Workshop. While the Red-Blue workshop is experiential, the Skills Workshop is didactic, a primer on how to talk with and listen to Uncle Charlie. And we're working on a new format, Better Angels Debate. Between the November 2016 elections and the end of 2017, we had held about 50 workshops. By the end of this year, the total will have grown to more than 250. Every weekend sees Better Angels workshops, sometimes more than a dozen, scattered around the nation. As I write this, we have almost 5,500 dues-paying members. That's a couple of thousand more than we did just 6 months ago. And by the way, the dues are only $10 a year. So whether you're staying today or not, consider going to www.better-angels.org and joining. For your $10, you won't get a tote bag, but you will get invitations to a streamed meeting once a month featuring a talk by one or more experts on polarization. When I recruit participants for Better Angels workshops, the conversation usually starts well. Their first reaction is that ending polarization is a great idea. But then I see something else setting in for some. In the case of progressives, maybe they see the other side as evil, Why spend a day with evil people if they can't convert them to the path? And for many conservatives who tend to see liberals as unthinking, what's the use if they're too shallow to change? As one conservative told me, it's painful to listen to liberals for 1 hour. 7 is too much. That's not how our red-blue workshops work, of course. We take a very cautious and gradual approach to the dialogue. Remember, it was a marriage therapist who designed our processes. But it's hard for anyone to envision, given the current level of tribalism in our country and worldwide. Bill says that the work we do is even harder than marriage counseling, much harder, he says. And there's the thing that never fails to astound me. According to extensive research done by a group called More in Common, 77% of Americans believe our differences are not so great that we can't come together. In a report called Hidden Tribes that got some news coverage a couple of months ago, that it identified 7 American political tribes, with progressive activists occupying the left wing and devoted conservatives the right. Those 2 wings seem to dominate what we see and hear. But the progressive activists are only 8% of the population, and the devoted conservatives only 6%. The report called the 5 tribes in the middle the exhausted majority. That's 86% of the public that's not busy hurling insults at each other. Yet our culture has gotten so dominated by the 2 small and insult-hurling and unlistening tribes on the extremes that we need better angels to recruit reds and blues, put them through a day of carefully moderated exercises to remind them how to talk and listen to each other. We need to be reminded to see the goodness in each other. I'll close with a quote from an American declaration, which you could call Better Angels' founding document. It was agreed to and signed by 75 Reds and 75 Blues gathered in convention in early June this year. For decades, those who practice polarization have led our public discussion and reinforced our worst instincts regarding what to believe and how to believe. We've been told that we are more divided than we actually are. We've been told that civility is a sign of weakness. We've been told that compromise is a sign of corruption. We've been told that those in the other party are evil, ignorant, or both. We've been told that common ground does not exist. We've been instructed by example that name-calling is preferable to reason-giving. We've been instructed by example that rancor and vitriol are needed for political success. Notwithstanding our deep differences over public policy and political values, we say with one voice that we are finished with these ways of thinking and acting. They are not consistent with who we aspire to be, and we love our country too much to practice or tolerate them any longer. The era in which they have dominated our public life must end. Today we invite Americans, including those who, like many of us, have in the past participated in polarization, to join us in creating a new moment in our history. I think we can all say amen to that.